Hey everybody. We are doing a recorded lecture. That should be a whole lot of fun, right? Um, so I just want to throw a few things out here. This is the first time I've really done one of these things, and hopefully you can see things all right. I'm using like a GeForce like screen capture software, which I've used a couple of times for very short videos, but I don't know how it's going to go for a very long video. Um, So there's a few things that we need to talk about. First, your design projects, specifically, when are those things due and how are they due since things have kind of changed. Um, so first off, they're not going to be due today, Monday, assuming that you're watching this on Monday. Um, I'm going to give you an extra week, and we're going to turn these things in via Canvas, kind of similar to what we've done previously. We're not going to just upload a zip because the zip file is going to be pretty large. You're going to have to actually email that to me through Canvas. You can also use just Gmail or something like that, whatever is convenient for you. But as a zip file with all of that stuff in there, all of following the guidelines that we had exactly verbatim. The only thing that we can't do via email is the like tactile, real, analog, printed element. Um, and I'm not exactly sure how to deal with that just yet. It is an important aspect, and I really would like to see your print, especially if you've already done it. So if you would like to get some extra credit toward your design project, you can turn that in either by dropping that in my mailbox at Webster if you're still on campus, if you're still using the facilities there, or you could potentially mail it to Webster University. Chances are you probably don't want to snail mail me this stuff, and instead just drop it in my mailbox. It's an adjunct mailbox area. If you talk to Sharon in the office, she should help you out with that. Okay, so it's not just that we're going to email our stuff, which is not super new for you guys, but also that I need to be able to work with you on your computers potentially if you run into any issues or you can't work with the program for one reason or another. So they gave us a bunch of resources on how to approach this. And I don't like what they gave me. Instead, I'd like to work with TeamViewer, which is a program that I've used several times with professional gigs. Teamviewer.com. It's totally free. You can download it, and then it basically gives me access to your computer, so I can take control of what you're working on and point you in the correct direction for whatever issue you might have. Scary background, look out. Okay, so if I open up TeamViewer here, which is on my computer now, you'll see this nice little dialog box. You don't even have to sign up like this or anything. If you just go under remote control, you'll see an ID and a password. And if you give me your ID and your password, I'm going to close this out, by the way, so you can't take control of my computer right away. But if you give me these two things, these two bits of information, I should be able to access your computer, see what you're seeing, and then potentially take control of your mouse and show you exactly where to go. We can also, once we're signed up or once we're connected via TeamViewer, we can chat if you have a microphone attached to your computer. If you have a laptop, chances are you do. If you don't, you can always check out a microphone from the media center if you still feel comfortable going to campus. If you are a long commuter or something like that, I can understand why you wouldn't. We can always chat via Facebook. Facebook, what's it called? Facebook Messenger or email or whatever your preferred method of chatting is. I'm totally open to it. We can Skype if you'd like as well. But this is a nice little tool for us to actually um, see what's on your computer and see what kind of issues you might have going on there. So highly recommend download this. have it ready. I can even use my phone to access it and stuff. Um, if we need to do that on the fly quickly. We are going to get into some After Effects stuff, but there's still a little bit more that we need to chat about in terms of how this class is going to work for the next 3 weeks at least. So I'm going to upload this lecture to YouTube. YouTube's kind of helpful because you can turn on closed captions. So if you don't want to hear me speak, or you have trouble hearing me speak or something like that, you can always turn on those closed captions and at least get a rough idea of what I'm trying to say. You can also stop, pause, rewind, do all that fun stuff if I'm going a little too quick for you, or you can skip forward if it's a bunch of stuff that you already know. All right, one last thing. If you head on over to Adobe's website, and I'll put this in the description, the YouTube description. There's like an effort from Adobe to make sure that students don't lose access to their Adobe stuff. So if you did not already have access to the Creative Cloud at home and you do want that, you can certainly get it via this request access thing. Now, Webster's supposed to give you access to it immediately, but if you find that you're having trouble with those guys for whatever reason, or they're overloaded and just can't get to you quickly enough, this should give you access to the programs that we need to complete this course during the period where we're doing this all remotely and stuff. So I'll put this link as well as the link for TeamViewer in the description. Okay, so let's get into Adobe After Effects. I am working on Adobe After Effects 2020 on my laptop here, so it might look very, very slightly different from the 2019 version that we are not very used to already. So once again, if it's been a little while for you, once you load up the program, you'll get this nice landing page where you see a bunch of projects that you've been working on. I have been working on some stuff, so you see those projects there. You will probably see nothing. If not, you might see like the line project that we worked on before, or one of the 3 line projects that we worked on before. Okay, so you can see these projects and when you worked on them last. We're not going to work on anything that we've done before, so we're going to go ahead and create a new project. So now we're in the program once again. If you have any windows that are missing or your layout's a little bit different than mine, remember that you can always go up to the Window tab up here. Under Workspace, you can go to Default and see exactly what I have here. If yours looks any different than this, it might be a 2019 to 2020 thing. But chances are it's going to look exactly like this. So what we're going to do today is the ball bouncing tutorial, which takes just a little bit of time. It's very simple, and it should get you kind of used to 2 things: properties and values, and how to adjust those things. We already know a little bit about doing keyframes. But we're going to do keyframes with some different types of things here. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create a new composition. You can do that however you'd like. Once again, there is a button in the middle of the screen for new composition. There's a button over in your project window for new composition, and you can always take the very slow way of going File, New, Composition. Nope, that is not an option anymore. But we can click this little button here and create a new composition for ourselves. We're going to call this Ball Bounce. I'm going to use all caps here. And all this stuff is presets from my other project. It should not look like that for you. Instead, we could go up to a custom preset, or we can set these things ourselves. We are going to use standard 1920 by 1080, go figure, and this pixel aspect ratio should be square for you already, but if it's not, it should be square. Frame rate at 23.976 frames per second is perfect. Resolution here, this kind of depends on the quality of the computer that you're working on. So If you're working on a laptop, you might want to turn this thing down a little bit. If you're working on a full-fledged desktop, you can turn it all the way up to full and we should be fine. I have a gaming laptop, so I can probably live with about half resolution. So start time code should always be 0, and the duration here, let's just set it for 20 seconds initially, and we can always turn that down when we need to. So ball bounce, 1920 by 1080, square pixels, 23.976 frames per second, half resolution or whatever resolution you think can work, and then 20-second duration. Press OK, and now we have our new composition. I set mine to be a black background. It's not going to matter at all what color background you set because we're going to make our own background. So let's start by making our own background. So the idea here is that we're going to build a room, and it's basically like drawing a cube, only you're inside the cube. So a cube would have a square or rectangle back wall. So we're just going to use this tool up here. Our toolbar once again is at the top of the window here. We're going to use this rectangle tool. It is Q on your keyboard if you want to know the hotkeys and stuff, but I hardly use the rectangle tool, so it's maybe one that you don't need to know. So again, if you've forgotten anything from a couple of weeks ago, once you select a tool, you should have tool options right next to the toolbar. So we have the option to fill or stroke. In this case, we want 0 stroke, but just a fill. So once again, a stroke is going to be the outline. So let me just turn one on real quick for you. So I'll turn on a 21 pixel square. And my rectangle is black, so maybe I should fix that for you. We'll make that rectangle red. Okay, so I'll have a red rectangle and I'll have a white outline. That is the stroke. The fill is the red part. In this case, I don't want any stroke. So I know we talked about it 2 weeks ago, but you might have forgotten again. If we click the blue text that says stroke here, we can turn off the stroke entirely. That's the little strike through rectangle there. Also, if you want to be a little bit faster about things and you want to kind of shuffle through things, hold an Alt on your keyboard and click the square, and we can shuffle through those things. So if you see me doing things a little bit quicker, I'm probably using that shortcut. Okay, for the fill itself, you can choose whatever you'd like. We're making the room color, so it's kind of a personal preference thing, but I'm going to pick this nice cyan color and maybe a little bit lighter on the lighter side of things. Okay, and then I'm going to put in my back wall here. So I'm not going to fill out the entirety of my canvas. I'm just going to have a rectangle, and if it goes outside the bounds of my canvas, that's just fine for me. I have room for another wall, a side wall, and then I have room for a floor. That's what I'm going for here. And to keep things nice and organized, we're going to rename this shape layer down here to back wall. Okay. If you've forgotten how to rename things, if we just click the layer and press enter on our keyboard, that will give us the option to rename. Okay, and we'll keep that as a shape layer. It's not going to bother us at all here. All right, so next up we actually need to draw some shapes. So I'm going to use the pen tool, the handy dandy pen tool, and I'm going to make sure that I do not have anything selected on my layers panel. If I do, I'm going to be drawing a mask. So that should have masked. Okay, if this is selected and then I use my pen tool, will it create a mask or will it create another shape underneath it? Sure looks like it created another shape underneath it. Yep, I got 2 shapes. All right, so with conventional footage, if you use that pen tool or the rectangle tool or whatever tool of your choosing, on top of video footage, it's automatically going to think that what you actually want to do is create a mask over that footage. If it's a shape, it's going to create another shape within that shape. So if we wanted to expand our rectangle, it's just going to create two shapes, and if I twirl down on my back wall, I'm going to see, hey, there's another shape within this rectangle. I don't want that, and I don't think you do either, so let's not do that. So if we click anywhere else in our layers panel, so we are not selecting the back wall, we can then create a new shape that will be its own layer, and that's what we want to get at. But before we do that, if we have the same exact color as our back wall, it's gonna get kind of muddy and difficult to tell what's going on. So we're going to select a different color. This time I'm going to pick a straight blue color there, not cyan, so it'll be a little bit different. And then I will draw out an approximate cube side. Okay, and I can fix that up once I finish my, whoopsies. I can clean this up as soon as I finish my shape there. That looks a little bit better. Maybe I can fix that up a little bit more still. Okay, and now I have a back wall and a side wall. That looks pretty good. If I think my back wall should stay above my side wall, so if I zoom in here, I can actually see that there's a bit of an issue. You see how my edges don't meet up squarely. I can take my back wall and I can move it above, and then hey, that fits very squarely there. So that shape layer that we've created, let's keep organized here and go with a side wall so we know what we're selecting if we decide to select stuff. By the way, if you want to zoom in on your canvas, we talked about it before, but if you've forgotten, it's the scroll wheel on your mouse will zoom you in, and then you can click that scroll wheel to use the hand tool. If you are using a laptop instead, there is a hand tool up here. It's a little bit tedious to go all the way up here and bring it all the way back. H on your keyboard is the shortcut for the hand tool. V on your keyboard is the shortcut back to your regular pointer. Control plus and minus will get you zoomed in and out. For me, I greatly prefer the mouse in After Effects to zoom in and out. All right, enough of this side stuff. Let's create a floor, which should be very, very easy. Now you have a couple of options here. You could use the pen tool just like you did with the side wall, or you could use the rectangle tool like we did with the back wall. And you might think the rectangle tool shouldn't work for you, but let's go ahead and do it real quick. Here's a rectangle, and it's the same as our back wall, so maybe I'll change that after the fact. What's a good color for a floor? How about yellow? That looks nice to me. Now that doesn't look great, but if I put that on, at the lowermost layer, then all of a sudden these things cover up all the weirdness. I will once again rename this to be floor. All right, looking good. We are part of the way there. We've created our room now. Room's looking good. It looks a little bit like a clown room, but I think you get the idea. Back wall, side wall, floor, all ready to go. So I want to combine all of these things so that I can move them all at once rather than independently. So if I decided I wanted to move my room, I would need to select all of my layers, and then I could kind of move my room around, which is okay. But if you're just trying to reach into your composition and move it around, all of a sudden you're grabbing just one layer, which is not ideal. So instead, what I would recommend is you select all of your layers, right click, and then go to pre-compose. So that's going to basically group all of your layers together in its own composition. Remember, we can have compositions within compositions, so if we have to adjust any of these things after the fact, we can just double click our pre-comp, go in there, and then change, say, one of our wall colors. So I'm just going to call this room, and we're going to make sure move all attributes to the new composition is selected. It doesn't really matter that much with this because we haven't added any kinds of effects or anything, but if we did add effects to, say, one of the walls or some keyframes or something like that, we can use this move all attributes to move those keyframes all of those effects into the pre-comp itself instead of being on the pre-comp inside your bigger composition. If that doesn't make sense to you, soon it will as you keep working with all of these pre-compositions and compositions in general. Okay, so we've pre-comped our room. Now if I click this thing, it just acts as a room. It is conformed to our canvas size. It's looking good. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so next up we are going to create a ball. So a ball is pretty simple. We're going to go about doing this kind of similarly to how we created our room. If you look at your toolbar up here, a bunch of tools, you don't see a circle tool like a rectangle tool, but if you click and hold the rectangle tool, you'll see an ellipse tool right underneath it. So all of these tools are nice, and they assume that you'll probably use the rectangle more than the circle, so that's going to be on top. But if you need access to it, click and hold and you will find it. It has the same adjustments that you'll find with the rectangle tool, so you can fill your ball with whatever color you'd like. I would choose something that you didn't use for the floor or either of your other two walls. So let's go with a green. I'm going to pick a green ball. Looks good to me. And then I am going to drag out my ellipse. And as I'm dragging out my ellipse, you'll see that it's kind of hard to get things perfectly round. But if I hold in Shift on my keyboard, the old Photoshop trick, that's not how it works today, but if you hold in Shift on your keyboard, it is going to make a perfect circle for you. It's going to constrain the properties. Okay, so a nice round circle for us, looking good so far. But what we're going to do is animate this ball to be spinning. And if I spin this ball, I'm just going to go under rotation for you real quick. And it's spinning around a anchor point that is not centered. So if I were to spin this thing from the center point, let's grab this anchor point, just kind of move it approximately to the center. Don't worry about that, we'll get there eventually. Okay, so if I am going to rotate this thing, you're not going to be able to tell that it's actually rotating because the circle is perfectly round. It looks exactly the same from all sides. Okay, we can tell because it's got these nice little squares around it to show how wide it is. But for the purposes of our animation, we wouldn't really be able to tell. So we need to do something to the ball to make sure that we can tell that it's rotating in the air. Okay, so what I'm going to do, and you can do this too, or you could be a little bit more creative with it, I'm just going to put an X. So I have this shape layer. If I want all the shape layers to be in their own layer, I can make sure that I create a shape inside the shape layer, but because I don't want to do that, because I want to work with pre-comps and be able to access these things a little bit easier, I'm just going to make sure that nothing's selected in my layer panel here. I'm going to create a line, and it's not going to do anything right away because my fill is turned on, and I can turn the fill off. Fill's off, and now I just want the stroke to be there. So I can turn the stroke back on, and however big makes sense. 21 seems way too big. 5 pixels looks good to me. Okay. So I have another shape layer here, and one more shape layer coming up. All right, I have a nice little X. Now you could use like the text tool to type an X. You could also potentially get really creative with it and make this into a baseball or basketball, whatever you choose. I'm just putting an X here so I can see the rotation of the ball. So let's go ahead and rename these things real quick. So this is the ball itself. This is X1, and this is X2. Okay. Now, once again, I am going to make this a pre-comp. before I do this, this is a nice helpful thing to do. So remember when I just had that issue with the pan behind tool, which I was just moving the anchor point. It was rotating around a weird place. Okay. When I did that, that was because the anchor point, this little crosshairs area, wasn't dead center on my ball. And still it's not quite dead center. But we know something that we can do. We've used it in Photoshop before, and I'm pretty sure we used it in After Effects even in our first thing. So if I go under the Align area, I can center my ball itself dead center of the frame. So if I create a pre-comp or a new composition, the general idea is the anchor point is going to be dead center of that composition. So if I take my ball and move it dead center before I create my pre-comp, now the anchor point for the ball will be dead center of my ball. Okay, so if that didn't make sense to you, just click these two buttons, align center for the ball itself. We'll take our X guys and we'll just move that approximately to where we want it to be. Might need to zoom in a little bit. X, sure, looks good there. Okay, when you're happy with where your X is on your ball and your ball is dead center of the frame, then we can select all three of these layers, right click it, go to pre-compose, and we're going to do that same thing, move all attributes. We can call this pre-composition ball complete. Okay, and now we have two layers, one being the room and the other being our completed ball. Now if I click rotation for my ball complete and I start to toggle that up, you're going to see my ball turns dead center without any kinds of issues. If you have issues here, if you need to move your anchor point to the center of the ball for some reason, like you might have missed a step or had some kind of issue, there is a tool up here in the toolbar called the pan behind tool. It's a Y on your keyboard, and you can click and drag an anchor point to wherever you want it to be. And wherever that anchor point is, that's where your object will rotate around. Okay, I'm going to Control Z a few times and get my anchor point back to the center. One too many times. I'll just pre-compose that. Ball complete. Could have just clicked redo, but you know, whatever. All right. So we have our ball and it rotates perfectly. Now if I click R for rotation and I test that thing out, you'll see two numbers here, one being degrees, right? 360 degrees in a complete turn. As soon as this number goes all the way to 360, you'll see the other number tick up 1. So that's one full rotation at that point. And if I just go to that first number and start turning it up, you'll look and see like there's no perceivable change because it's made 19 complete rotations at this point and ended right back to where it started. So that's important to understand, especially if you're clicking and dragging these things and you don't see anything perceivably happening. Okay, so we have our ball, we have our room. First thing that we're going to animate is the position of our ball within our room. So if we click that thing and drag it out of frame, that's where we want to start. Here's what we want to have happen. We want our ball to enter frame, bounce on the floor again, bounce off the back wall, floor, roll, come to a stop, and then disappear. It sounds crazy, but I assure you, you can do this. Okay, so we're going to mess with position first, right? So any of the properties that we want to adjust for any object, for any layer, if we twirl down on those things, we'll see a transform category, and you're going to see anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity, all of which can be keyframed. So if you have those stopwatch icons next to any of these properties, they are able to be keyframed. So let's do it. Let's keyframe position. Oh, one more thing. If you want to access these things quickly, I know that we talked about it before, but P on your keyboard will get you to position. R on your keyboard will get you to rotation. T will get you to opacity. A will get you to anchor point. Pretty much what you would intuitively expect will work for you for these transform properties. They believe that you're going to work with these more than anything else. So, they gave them precedence with hotkeys. Okay, so we're going to toggle on keyframes for position initially. So at the beginning of our timeline, you'll see a keyframe created at 0 frames in, and then we'll just skip forward a little bit. We have 20 seconds of length, and we know that we can adjust these keyframes after the fact, so if it's not perfect, no big deal. So we start out of the frame. Second position is going to be down here. So the first bounce, okay, probably around an equal spacing for your next keyframe. It's going to come up in the air. Next keyframe, it's going to come down again and bounce one more time. A little bit further, it's going to come up and bounce off this back wall. And these hills here should get a little bit smaller over time because gravity should be doing its thing. Okay, it bounces off that back wall, comes back down. A few frames ahead. Bounces back up. Back down. Back up one more time. Very small bounce. Back down. And then it's going to roll out. All right. So there's a bunch of keyframes there, and my animation only lasts, 8 seconds? It's going to disappear eventually, so we'll need a little bit of extra time here. But let's play it back and see what we have. So ball bounces, bounces off the back wall, bounces back a few times, and barring any kind of realistic gravity, it's kind of doing what we want it to do. We might need to spread this stuff out a little bit. We might need to speed things up more than that. So, all right, comes down, bounces, and then this is like the ball is on the moon. So I can kind of speed this stuff up if I click and drag these other keyframes in. Okay, all right, that one's faster, but this one's very slow now. Okay, and then all of them are basically too slow. Okay, rather than leave you in silence for a little while, I just skipped ahead for you. Here's what we're looking at. I just brought those keyframes in a little bit closer to get me a speed that was actually okay. So there's still a bunch of issues with it though, right? So comes in and bounces and does what we want positionally. It's not rotating. It's also got some weird stuff with the positioning. So if we pause for a second here, we see these nice like trails. And we can see these little dots on that trail, and those are actually our keyframes. So between two keyframes, it's going to interpret where like equally from this position to this position over this period of time, right? Okay, so that's where it's going to be at any given frame. But if you see these weird kind of curves, these Bezier curves that exist here, they're a bit of an issue, especially if the ball is supposed to be bouncing specifically straight down or straight up. So we can mess with these Bezier curves just like we would with the pen tool in Photoshop. So if you click on any of our big keyframes, those are the big empty squares. along that path, we should see Bezier handles, which we can then kind of clean up. So if we want our ball to kind of slope on the way in, we can make that happen for sure with this Bezier handle here and this one here. So now it kind of slopes on its way in and then bounces directly up. And we can kind of leave this archway in the air because that kind of makes sense. But we could certainly smooth it out a little bit more. And then every time it hits the ground, we shouldn't have that kind of archway. We should have a very hard stop. So we can grab these Bezier handles and bring them in. Okay. Now, if you do not have a Bezier handle, it's easy to fix, just like the pen tool in After Effects. Again, if you click and hold, or in Photoshop, sorry, excuse me. So if I click and hold the pen tool at the top of our window here, we can see that Convert Vertex tool. So anytime we have something that has a Bezier that we don't want to have a Bezier, we can click that and it will convert it to a regular keyframe. And if we don't have that Bezier, we can click and drag and then we'll create a Bezier. So we could do this just as easily with these areas that we don't want to have a Bezier. Rather than bring those handles in, we could just click them, and then you have a very solid, not Bezier curve. So for all of those bounces, we can take away our Beziers, and that's going to look a whole lot better. We can also make sure that that one has one on one side as it's going in, and then doesn't really on the other. Okay, let's see what that looks like real quick. Play it back, and a lot better, right? So positionally that works much, much better. But if we look really closely at it, especially when it slows down and stops, we're going to see like a pretty hard stop here. So if I play this back, it just halts suddenly. So there's some things that we can do inside our keyframes themselves that will kind of smooth out some motion beyond just the Bezier pathway. Okay, so if I right-click any of our keyframes here, we have some options under Keyframe Assistant. Now when you go here, you can see Easy Ease In, and Easy Ease Out. Okay, all of these things are going to help you smooth out motion generally, but the two that we use most often are Easy Ease In and Easy Ease Out. So you ease into a stop. So if you're moving and then you're going to stop, you would ease into that stop, just like you ease into a stop sign, right? Like you don't hard stop or it's a little bit startling, just like our animation. You ease out from a stop, right? Like you don't peel out on the way out from a stop sign. You're not going to gun it. You're going to smooth your motion, and that feels better for your passengers. It feels better for your viewers if you're an animator. Easy ease in, easy ease out. Easy eases go between starts and stops in the middle of an animation, so if something's going to smooth out, stop, and then take off again, you can use an easy ease. That's probably not as helpful. So because we are stopping, we are going to use an easy ease in. So that very last keyframe here looks like a little bit different than your regular diamond keyframe. If you look here, it looks kind of like a bracket. So the idea, again, easy ease in, easy ease out, into a stop, out from a stop. If you're going to put one on both sides, and it's not going to matter because our ball's on the outside of our composition for that very first keyframe, but maybe yours is showing a little bit or something. We can right click that, go to easy ease out because we're leaving a stopped position and going into motion. You'll see that those brackets look like how you would write brackets or parentheses, right? Like you don't put the parentheses on the other side of things or it looks weird. Same goes with your animation. So now if I play this back one more time, you'll see our position's looking good, and it smooths out to that stop at the very end. Something very helpful for us as animators. One last thing with motion in general, or position animation. So we want this to kind of look a little bit smoother in its motion. And we can do that through this really cool thing in After Effects that most other animators don't have, or a whole lot don't have, and that is adding motion blur. So if you head on over to your layers panel here, we can toggle it on for whichever layer we'd like to do it for. If we turned it on for room, it wouldn't make any perceivable difference because our room doesn't move. We will add it to the ball, and it looks like this thing that looks like a moving ball. Go figure. Okay, so if you hover over it, it says motion blur simulates shutter duration. Okay, and right underneath that, there's a little like checkbox, and you can turn it on for whatever layer you'd like. Now we can see my ball has some motion blur to it. I can toggle it off and you can see what happens there. So in motion, you can certainly see that there's some motion blur. Now, if you don't see that you have the option to turn on motion blur for your stuff, it's right down here all the way in the bottom left of the entire program. You see, hey, you can expand or collapse layer controls, so that's your blending modes, and then right next to that is expand or collapse the transfer controls pane. Okay, so that'll give you transfer controls. You can turn things on like 3D, make a 3D layer and stuff, which will be much later in the course, or next week potentially. Okay, so motion blur turned on for the ball. Hey, that looks a whole lot better, right? So if this is a little bit annoying to you, if you can't tell exactly what's going on because you can't see your X and stuff as we start to mess with these other properties, you can always just toggle that off for the time being, but do not forget to turn it back on before you actually export. That's what's really going to make this thing look complete. So I'm going to leave that off for now just so you can see what I'm doing, and I will definitely turn it back on later. Okay, so I'm going to twirl down on my ball complete, and I'll see twirled down under transform some other things that we are going to adjust. So the next thing that we're going to adjust on the list of properties that are able to be adjusted is rotation. So back at the very beginning of my timeline, I'm going to toggle on keyframes for rotation. I'm going to move my playhead forward until my ball hits the ground. Right? Now I could try to just move my playhead there and hope for the best and try to get it as close as I can. But remember, there are these little arrows next to add new keyframe button where we can jump to the very next keyframe. Go to previous keyframe, go to next keyframe. Okay, so it is for the position property, and we have all these keyframes placed already. We got our timing really good, so might as well just follow those things. So if we jump to the next position keyframe, that's where we're going to make our next rotation keyframe. Now you can click the button to add a keyframe here, or you can just adjust the property and it will automatically create a keyframe for you. So here's what we're going to do. First, we want to make sure that the ball's moving in the correct direction. So if I rotate it this way as it's moving that way, it's not going to look great. So it looks like we need to go in the negative direction. So I'm just going to leave that at 0 degrees, but I'm going to go -1 rotation. So it's going to rotate a full time around before it hits the floor. And it doesn't look like it did anything, but if I scrub from the beginning to that keyframe, you'll see my ball rotates as it's falling. And it rotates one full rotation as it hits the floor for the first time. Okay, so now I'm going to jump position keyframes once in the air. Next time it hits the floor again, we're going to do another rotation. So we won't be at -1 this time. Instead, this time we'll be at -2. Now if I scrub again, I'm going to see, hey, my ball continues to rotate and makes a full rotation as it hits the floor there. Okay, we are going to do not the same thing this time because it's not a big archway into the floor. Instead, it's going to hit the wall at this point, but it doesn't go a full it shouldn't go a full rotation because it doesn't have the same distance as these other arches. Okay, so instead of doing a full rotation here, we can do half of 360, which is 180. But maybe we can do this. Let's give it a shot. Minus 2.5, and then it does it for us. Hey, that's kind of convenient, right? So if you don't want to do that math, you can do minus 2.5, and it's going to do half a rotation on its way up to the wall. And then we're actually going to start moving in the opposite direction this time. So if we assume another half rotation to the floor hit, let's just make sure we get on that keyframe exactly. That would be just minus 2 again. Okay, then we can skip forward. There's a little archway, and should it go a full rotation at this point? Depends on how high yours is arched, but in my case, it's not moving nearly as far this time, so maybe we'll do another half rotation. So we're then at minus 1.5 rotations. Skip an arch and back to the ground, maybe another half a rotation. So now we're just at minus 1 rotations. Okay, and it's going to continue to rotate all the way out. And that's a much longer distance this time. So maybe we get all the way to a full 1 rotation. So that's going back to 0 and then 1 more. So that's 2 rotations throughout this movement. Let's see how it looks, and then we'll make some adjustments accordingly. So looks okay. But that last bit of rotation is way too much. So once it starts rolling, it rolls like crazy. So overestimated on that portion. So we'll just jump to that keyframe, and we'll change this from 1 to maybe 0. So that'll be half the rotations. Let's see how that goes. Much better. Now, if you didn't see it before when we added that easy ease in, you should see it now. As it rotates, it hits hard and just suddenly stops rotating. So what we're going to do is add an easy ease in here. Right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease in, and you see that bracket there at the end. And let's see how that looks. Much, much smoother. We can do that at our beginning keyframe too. It's probably just good housekeeping here. Easy ease out. Our ball is actually outside of the frame, so you probably won't be able to perceive it very well. Okay, so our rotation is now looking pretty good. Hopefully you're doing all right with this thing. If not, maybe pause me for a second and work on those rotations. All right, so one last thing to do. We're feeling good about our rotation. We're feeling good about our position. Scale. Oh, 2 things to do. Scale and then opacity is going to be the very last thing we do. But what this thing is really missing is the ball should kind of squish as it hits the floor. Right now it just stays a perfectly solid ball. Maybe if you have a golf ball, if you drew that instead of this green amorphous ball that I've drawn, maybe scale isn't something you want to do, but you want to do it even if you drew a golf ball, just to show that you can do it. So we are going to toggle on keyframes for scale. Playheads at the beginning of our timeline once again. We will skip forward until our ball hits the floor. Okay. Now I'm going to zoom in on my timeline. There's this little thing down here that looks like mountains and mountains, small mountains, big mountains, and you can use the slider next to it to kind of zoom in on your timeline itself. Okay, so I'm zooming in because I want the frame immediately before it hits the floor. The ball should be perfectly round, so I'm going to add a keyframe right there. Okay, then right after it hits the floor, it should go back to being a perfectly round ball. So the frame after the hit, round. The frame before the hit, round. And by just clicking these keyframes here, like the add new keyframe, it's going to add a keyframe that has no property change, right? No value change for that property. So then in between those two keyframes, we can actually change it. And then it's going to go right back to being round right after this one frame. Okay, but rather than just scale it down, right, like our ball gets very small suddenly, we want just the top and bottom to get small on us. So to do that, we need to unconstrain proportions. So if we look at our scale area here and then look at the little chain link next to it, if we click that, we can now scale the X position and the Y position separately. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave my X position alone and just scale down my Y position a little bit. So when it hits, it squishes vertically. So as it comes in, it's round, round, round until it hits that keyframe, squishes, comes back to round. Okay, we're going to do this every time that the ball collides with something. So once again, we have the floor. We're going to create a keyframe for scale, another keyframe for scale 2 frames later. And dead center, we're going to make that adjustment. And it's just going to be a Y adjustment. And we're going to feel it out. Whatever looks good to you is good for me. Right now I'm doing 90%, but it might be something more or less for you depending on what kind of ball you've created. Okay, once again, it's going to collide with the wall, but this time you might have to do X position instead of Y position. Remember, we didn't make a full rotation for the wall collision. But once again, we are going to create a keyframe on one frame before the collision, one frame after the collision, and during the collision, we're going to make an adjustment to, yes, the X position this time. And I have 90 again, but maybe I'll do like 92 because it's losing momentum at this point. All right, once again, keyframe before, keyframe after, and during, one slight adjustment, 94 at this point. Big arc, nothing during the arc, one frame before the collision, one frame after the collision, and during the collision we will make the adjustment. Oops, I'm off by one frame. There we go. Okay, one last, maybe that was too much. That was too much. This one should be like 97. Hardly perceivable. It's not really bouncing too high. One last collision here, and it should be almost nothing because we're going to smooth out and stop after this point. So let's set it for 98. All right, let's play that back real quick and see what we have. Yep. Our ball now squishes every single time it collides with something. Every bounce it squishes, the bounce against the wall it squishes. Until the end it squishes the least, and then not at all as it rolls out. All right, how'd you do? Good. Good. I'm expecting you flew through this thing. We have one last thing to do with it though, and that's after it rolls out, we want it to disappear. So if you've animated your ball to completely roll out of the frame, you might have to do some adjustment with your position, right? Like we wanted it to roll to a stop, right? Okay, so we are going to add keyframes for opacity finally. Okay, I'm going to put that first keyframe right about when the ball stops, just a little bit before when the ball stops. Then I'll put another one a little bit ahead, a little bit after when the ball stops, and I will turn the opacity value to 0. Okay, so if I look, we're at full opacity the entire way until right at the end, and then it's going to fade away. That fade was a little bit too quick for me, so I'm going to spread those keyframes out a little bit. All right, that's looking pretty good for me. I think that I'm happy with it. Um, and we're about ready to export. There's one thing that I need to do with mine. I'm not sure if you need to do it with yours because you might have left it on, and that is toggle on motion blur. So once again, I'm going to turn motion blur on for my ball, and I have this nice animated ball bouncing in from the outside of the frame, bouncing a couple of times on the floor, on the backboard, a few more times and rolling out, then disappearing, all with motion blur on it. If you have this, you're looking great. If yours spins in the wrong direction one way or the other, that's going to be a rotation issue. If you have squishes that don't quite work right, or your ball stays deformed after it makes a collision, that's something with the size property. If you have a positional issue, if it floats around, that's your timing with position keyframes. So there's a bunch of issues that you could potentially have, and feel free to email me or message me however you'd like to kind of fix this thing up. We do have to export it, and if you remember how to export, we're going to do it the same way we always did. So here's how it goes. Maybe stop your animation from going. File, export, add to render queue. We're going to change our output module. So that's the blue text next to the text that says output module. We're going to change that over to QuickTime. We are going to change this to Apple ProRes 422. I have my display settings changed for you guys. Sorry about it. It's kind of hard to see. All right. QuickTime Apple ProRes 422. Press OK and render this thing out. And it should play back faster than mine. Well, I guess it kind of depends on your computer. But once you have this thing done, what I need you to do is upload it to whatever platform of your choice. So upload it to YouTube, upload it to Vimeo, wherever we can see it. You can make it unlisted, like I'm going to make this lecture as well. So no one else can see it but me and whoever you give the link to and stuff. However you want to do it, so long as I can see it, and then send it to me in your choice of doing thing, however you choose to do it. I'm going to go ahead and make another discussion on Canvas, and my preferred way would be for you to post a link to your ball animation there. But if you have any kinds of troubles or technical issues getting your stuff on YouTube, and you have to like attach it or send it to me one way or another, you can always email it to me as well. I would highly recommend doing the Canvas way. I can keep track of things a little bit easier that way, but once again, we're trying to make things easier on you because I know this is kind of difficult and weird. But go ahead and upload that stuff to YouTube, put it up on Canvas for me, and that's it. That's all we have for this week. Definitely get your stuff posted. You have until next Monday to get this thing all completed and stuff. Feel free to give me some feedback on how this is going to work for you. If you hate this kind of process, or if you're having trouble with YouTube, or think I should do the WebEx thing or something like that, feel free to give me some feedback there. Otherwise, I will continue to do things just like this next week. Another video tutorial on After Effects. All right, I'll see you all next week.